Black prisoner who said I can't breathe after being restrained by Pentonville guards died amid jail failings. Now this is one of the headlines that popped up on my news app. So I thought I would do a story on this because what struck me about this was massive headlines. If you have a look, go on Google it, and just type in black prisoner died. Now for me, I don't understand why they feel the need to have massive headlines with the word black. Black prisoner dies. Now I don't know what their media agenda is, but putting big statements up like that to try and attract attention, I mean, it's the same as this video, the thumbnail to it will attract you to it because of what is in the thumbnail. But any prisoner, white prisoners, it's not labelled white prisoner dies. Or when I do stories on attacks inside of prison, it doesn't say a white prisoner attacked. I don't know why they've got big headlines up saying black prisoner dies. I mean, it doesn't matter what colour the prisoner is. A prisoner has died. It should just say prisoner has died after being restrained by guards. Because the guards are the screws, what I'll refer to them as. The screws that restrained them were probably black as well. So why doesn't it say a black screws restrained black prisoner? But like I've mentioned, I will mention it is Wayne Bailey, and I will talk about the story just now. But any prisoner shouldn't be left to die in this way, whether white, black, Asian, whatever. But putting big headlines up like that to try and cause racial tensions, because that's exactly what it's doing. And we all know what's been happening with the media lately, with the riots, the protests, and it's going to be happening in the prisons soon. And it seems as though that's what they are wanting. They're wanting the prisons to start, or the prisoners to start fighting with each other, fighting with the screws, and having a big massive riot throughout the prison system. That's the way things are heading. And I will be bringing you the stories, letting you know my thoughts on it and exactly what is going on, and coming up with what I think is going on. Because anyways, getting into the story. Oh, here we go again. A black prisoner with mental health difficulties died after being restrained by guards, and his pleas that he could not breathe were ignored. This is what has been heard at the inquest. So Wayne Bailey, who was 43, he died on May the 17th, 2022, 6 days after he had been remanded at HMP Pentonville in North London. An inquest heard he complained on the day of his death that his new cell was unclean, and guards decided he had to be restrained before being moved to a segregation unit. The health of Mr. Bailey, who had sickle cell disease, a delusional disorder and epilepsy, began to deteriorate after he was restrained, and he repeatedly told prison workers that he was struggling to breathe. A jury at Bow Coroner's Court concluded that neglect played a part in Mr. Bailey's death 10 hours later. In the 2.5 years since Wayne passed, we have lived with the knowledge that Wayne spent much of his last day not being believed and naked, alone, unwell, and without any medical treatment, despite having well-documented serious chronic health conditions, said the family. Restrained by prison officers caused Wayne to suffer a sickle cell crisis, which he would have survived if he had received the most basic of care. We very much hope that lessons learned from Wayne's death led to meaningful changes in the way that vulnerable people with long-term health conditions are cared for whilst in prison, both generally but particularly in circumstances involving restraint, so that others do not have to experience the pain of knowing their loved one's death could have been so easily avoided. Now this is the prison system for you all over. If you have got mental health or serious health problems in prison, you are bang in trouble, because the healthcare inside of prison is absolutely appalling. It's fucking absolute dog shit. And I have done videos on this previously about healthcare inside of prison. And it goes on to say the inquest was told that Mr. Bailey collapsed as he was being transferred to the segregation unit. And when he said he could not breathe, he was subjected to a forcible strip search with his clothes being cut off instead of being rushed for medical care. In segregation, a nurse failed to spot that Mr. Bailey was in sickle cell crisis. His health was failing remarkably, and vital observations were not taken. His medical records showing his sickle cell disease were not checked before referral was made for him to be assessed by a mental health nurse. After 7 hours in segregation, Mr. Bailey was moved to the healthcare unit and collapsed again on the transfer, needing a wheelchair to complete the journey. Hickman and Rose, solicitors for Mr. Bailey's family, said he asked to see a doctor and repeated that he could not breathe, but vital observations were again not taken and he was provided with no further care. 3 hours later, he was found unresponsive and died shortly before midnight. The inquest jury found the lack of responses from Mr. Bailey had been interpreted as non-compliance instead of signs of a medical emergency. There had been a breakdown of communication between prison and healthcare staff, and his condition had not been properly monitored in his final hours. Ellie Cornish from Hickman and Rose said Mr. Bailey's treatment had been characterised by a profound lack of professional curiosity, common sense and humanity. And this is exactly what happens in prison. You get treated like a dog, you don't get treated like a human. And I've done videos on this previously. The way the nurses speak to you in prison is absolutely horrendous. If you're in a situation where you need their help, nurses have normally got a duty of care to be kind and courteous to you. In prison, they talk to you like vermin. So it goes on to say warning signs of what was in fact a medical emergency were disregarded, unnoticed, or unidentified. A sickle cell crisis can be entirely treatable, but as the jury found, multiple factors, failures by prison and healthcare meant that in this instance it proved fatal. Wayne's family have shown extraordinary dignity and resilience throughout this inquest, and damning conclusion that his death was contributed by the neglect is an important step forward in their ongoing pursuit of justice for Wayne. The prison's ombudsman previously investigated Mr. Bailey's death and found a litany of failings. It concluded the initial use of force on Mr. Bailey was not justified. The nurse who saw him had failed to monitor him properly, and staff had failed to investigate if he had sickle cell disease. Coroner Mary Hassel has now issued a report aimed at preventing future deaths and prisons. It doesn't mean nothing because nothing will change and future deaths will not be prevented, as that is what happens inside the prison system. It is an absolute shit state. It's even worse now than what it was years ago with the overcrowding crisis, the understaffed, and at the moment the prisons are on their arses, and obviously there is staff and nurses that care, not very many, very small percentage, but they make it hard work for, the other ones that don't care make it hard for the ones that actually do care. But again, if you become ill inside of prison, you are bang in trouble. I've witnessed firsthand lads who have gotten or developed cancer whilst in prison. They didn't get the care straight away. They ended up dying from the cancer, which could have been prevented if they'd gotten seen straight away. One of them was a very good friend of mine. He had skin cancer in his ear, which could have been prevented. The prison took that long to get him to hospital. It spread, went into his brain, and ultimately he died. And that was Mark Day, so rest his soul, Mark. Yeah, but it does go on to say, a prison service spokesperson said, "Our thoughts are with Mr. Bailey's family and friends at this difficult time. Following Mr. Bailey's death, we have improved training for prison staff around the use of force and segregation to ensure that prisoners and prison staff are kept safe. We will respond to the prevention of future death reports in due course." Brushed under the carpet, not to be heard of again, because that's what happens But unfortunately for Wayne and his family, he'll never be seen again outside of prison because of the neglect he suffered in there. And again, when people are suffering inside of prison with conditions like this and mental health problems, they look at them like a problem. And the problem inside of prison is something that they don't want to deal with. They will just chuck you in a cell, like it stays there, wrap you up, treat you like a dog, chuck you in the cell, leave you to die alone. And that is what happens inside the prison. But I will be bringing you more stories about corruption in prison and everything else that is going on in the prison news on a daily basis. Hope you enjoyed that, people. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as usual, remember to comment, like and subscribe.